family curse. The newly revealed passage twisted and turned like the intestines of some ancient beast, its narrow walls pressing in on the group as they descended deeper into the crypt. The faint sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere ahead, mingling with their labored breaths. Emily walked at the front of the group, her flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. "I don't like this," Alice muttered behind her. "It feels wrong. Everything about this place feels wrong," Liam replied, his voice tight. "But we can't turn back now." Emily didn't respond. Her focus was fixed on the path ahead, her mind racing with the implications of what they'd just learned. Lady Eleanor's sorrowful words echoed in her ears. "Michael's curse binds not only me, but the castle itself. To free me is to face his wrath." But there was something else gnawing at her, a sense of unease that went beyond the crypt's suffocating air. She couldn't shake the feeling that this journey was more personal than she'd realized. The forgotten journal. They reached a small chamber at the end of the passage, its walls lined with ancient wooden shelves. Most of the shelves were empty, but a few held crumbling books and scrolls that looked as though they hadn't been touched in centuries. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and on it rested a thick, leather-bound journal. Maggie approached the pedestal cautiously, her eyes narrowing as she studied the book. "This must be it," she said. "The key to understanding the curse." Emily stepped forward, her hands trembling as she lifted the journal. The leather was cracked and dry, and the pages felt brittle beneath her fingers. The text was written in a spidery hand, its ink faded but legible. It was Michael Shaw's personal journal. "I don't know if I can read this," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have to," Maggie said. "Whatever's in there, it's important." Emily nodded, forcing herself to turn the pages. The entries were a mixture of alchemical formulas, cryptic symbols, and passages detailing Shaw's descent into madness, his obsession with immortality, his experiments on the living and the dead, and his belief that he could control time itself were laid bare in horrifying detail. But it was a passage near the end of the journal that made her blood run cold. The bloodline connection. The curse must be tied to the bloodline. Only one who carries the blood of the Shaws can sever the threads of time and break the seal. The price, of course, will be great, but necessary to achieve what I could not. Emily's hands shook as she read the words. She turned to Maggie, her voice trembling. "He tied the curse to his own bloodline. It's like a lock, and only a Shaw can unlock it." Maggie frowned. "But what does that have to do with us?" Emily flipped the page, her heart pounding as she read the next passage. "The descendants of my line will carry the burden of this curse. They will hear the whispers, feel the pull of the castle, and be drawn here when the time is right. Only through them can the cycle be completed." She looked up at the group, her face pale. "It's me," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm connected to the Shaws." Alice's eyes widened. "What? That doesn't make sense. How could you?" Emily held up a hand, cutting her off. "My grandmother always talked about our family's Irish roots. She said there was a castle where our family's story began, but she never told me its name. She said it was cursed, and that we were better off forgetting it." She swallowed hard, the weight of realization settling over her. "This is the castle. My family's part of the Shaw bloodline. The curses hold." Liam took a step back, his expression wary. "If you're a Shaw, then what does that mean? For you? For us?" "It means she's the key," Maggie said, her voice steady. "Michael's curse is tied to his bloodline. If Emily is part of that line, she's the only one who can break it." "But how?" Emily asked, her voice rising with desperation. "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to end this." Maggie placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure it out. Together." Before Emily could respond, a low, resonant hum filled the chamber. The air grew colder, and the shadows on the walls began to writhe. The journal in Emily's hands felt hot, and the words on the page shifted, forming a single phrase. "The price must be paid." A vision of the past. The room dissolved into darkness, and Emily felt herself falling. When the light returned, she was no longer in the crypt. She stood in a grand hall filled with flickering candlelight, its walls adorned with opulent tapestries. At the center of the room was Michael Shaw himself, his piercing gaze fixed on a young woman kneeling before him. It was Lady Eleanor. "You dare defy me?" Michael's voice was cold and sharp, like a blade slicing through the air. "You would betray your own bloodline." "I betrayed nothing," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I spoke the truth. What you're doing is unnatural." Michael's expression darkened. "You will pay for your insolence. Your name will be erased, your memory forgotten, and your soul bound to this castle for eternity." Eleanor's form flickered, her image dissolving into the shadows. Michael turned, his gaze locking onto Emily, as though he could see her. "You cannot escape your destiny," he said, his voice echoing in her mind. "The blood binds us. The return." Emily gasped as she was jolted back to the present. The crypt reappeared around her, its cold, suffocating air pressing down on her chest. Maggie knelt beside her, shaking her gently. "Emily, are you okay?" Emily nodded, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "I saw him," she said. "Michael. He knew this would happen. He knew I'd be here." "What did he say?" Maggie asked. Emily hesitated, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "He said the blood binds us, that I can't escape my destiny, the burden of the curse." The group fell silent, the implications of Emily's vision sinking in. Alice was the first to break the silence, her voice tinged with both fear and frustration. "So what now? If this curse is tied to your family, does that mean you're supposed to what? Sacrifice yourself?" Emily shook her head, her mind racing. "I don't know, but I'm not going to let this curse take any more lives. If I can end it, I will." Liam frowned. "And if the price is too high?" Emily met his gaze, her expression resolute. "Then I'll pay it." A plan takes shape. Maggie stood, her face grim. "We need to keep moving. If Michael's spirit is still tied to this place, he won't let us go without a fight." Emily nodded, clutching the journal tightly. "Then we'll fight him. We'll find the heart of this curse and destroy it." The group turned toward the passageway, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The crypt seemed to tremble as they moved, as though the castle itself was bracing for what was to come. As they ventured deeper into the labyrinth, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the price Michael spoke of was closer than they realized, and that her connection to the Shaws would demand more from her than she ever imagined. Portal to hell. The crypt's suffocating darkness seemed to deepen as the group pressed onward, the air growing heavier with each step. The passageway twisted and turned, the rough stone walls closing in like the ribs of a long-buried beast. Emily led the way, clutching Michael Shaw's journal tightly to her chest, the weight of its revelations pressing down on her shoulders. The group finally emerged into a vast chamber, its domed ceiling arching high overhead. The room was dominated by a massive circular platform of carved stone, its surface etched with intricate runes and symbols that pulsed faintly with an eerie red glow. At the center of the platform was a depression, its edges scorched black as though something had burned there long ago. Maggie stepped forward, her flashlight beam sweeping over the platform. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling. "The heart of the curse." Emily glanced at the journal, flipping through its brittle pages until she found a diagram that matched the platform exactly. "This is where he performed the ritual," she said, "where he tried to cheat death." "What are those symbols?" Alice asked, keeping her distance from the platform. "They don't look like any language I've ever seen." "They're binding runes," Maggie explained. "Symbols of containment, but they've been corrupted, twisted into something else." Liam shifted nervously, his flashlight flickering. "What does that mean?" "It means this isn't just a ritual site," Maggie said grimly. "It's a gateway. The ritual begins." Emily set the journal on the platform, her hands shaking as she read aloud from its faded pages. The incantation was written in a language she didn't recognize, the syllables harsh and guttural as they rolled off her tongue. With each word, the red glow of the runes intensified, casting shifting shadows on the walls. Maggie added ingredients from her bag, salt, iron filings, and a vial of dark liquid that smelled faintly of herbs and ash, onto the platform. The runes flared brightly, their light pulsing in time with Emily's words. The air in the chamber grew colder, and a faint, distant sound began to rise. At first, it was barely audible, like the murmur of wind through the trees. But as the ritual continued, the sound grew louder, resolving into the unmistakable wails of human voices. "Are those screams?" Alice asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," Maggie said, her tone heavy with dread. "The portal is opening." The portal unveiled. With a final, guttural word, Emily completed the incantation. The ground beneath the platform trembled, and the depression at its center began to glow with a sickly green light. The glow intensified, forming a swirling vortex that seemed to twist reality itself. The air around the portal shimmered, distorting like heat waves rising from a fire. From within the vortex came the screams, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of anguished voices crying out in terror and pain. Shadowy figures emerged from the swirling light, their forms indistinct but filled with malice. They writhed and twisted as though trapped in a storm, their skeletal hands reaching toward the edges of the portal. Emily stepped back, her heart racing. "What is this?" "The gateway to Michael's domain," Maggie said. "It's a prison, a place where the souls he damned are trapped. But it's also a doorway to something far worse." The shadowy figures surged toward the group, their forms flickering like dying flames. One of them broke free, its formless body coalescing into the shape of a gaunt, skeletal man with hollow eyes that burned with green fire. It lunged at Liam, its bony fingers outstretched. The shadows attacked. Liam screamed, stumbling backward as the shadowy figure reached for him. Maggie reacted quickly, pulling a handful of salt from her bag and throwing it into the creature's face. The shadow recoiled with a guttural hiss, its form dissolving into smoke. "Stay back!" Maggie shouted. "They can't touch us if we hold the line." The other shadows hesitated, their twisted forms writhing just beyond the edge of the platform. But the vortex continued to swirl, and the pressure in the room grew unbearable. The screams from within the portal rose to a deafening crescendo, drowning out even the sound of their own panicked breaths. Emily glanced at the journal, frantically scanning its pages for a way to close the portal. "There has to be something," she muttered, her voice shaking. "Something we can do to stop this. What if we just destroy the whole thing?" Alice shouted, her voice tight with panic. "The platform, the runes, everything." Maggie shook her head. "It's not that simple. Destroying the gateway could release whatever's inside. We have to seal it." Michael's influence. As the group debated, the shadows began to gather, their forms merging into a single, massive figure that towered over the platform. The room trembled as the figure took shape, its eyes blazing with the same green fire as the skeletal guardian. Emily's breath caught as she recognized the figure's face. It was Michael Shaw. "You cannot undo what has been done," Michael's voice boomed, echoing through the chamber. "The curse is eternal, as is my dominion." Emily stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "You tied this curse to your bloodline," she said. "That means I can break it." Michael's gaze fixed on her, and his lips curled into a cruel smile. "You are but a fragment of what I created. Do you think you have the strength to oppose me?" Emily swallowed hard, her fear threatening to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm going to try." Sealing the portal, Maggie stepped beside Emily, her voice low but resolute. "We can do this. Together." The two began chanting a new incantation from the journal, their voices rising above the cacophony of screams. Maggie threw another handful of salt onto the platform, and Emily traced the runes with trembling fingers, their light shifting from red to white. The portal pulsed violently, the vortex shrinking as the ritual took effect. The shadows howled, their forms dissolving into the air as the light grew brighter. Michael's towering figure let out a deafening roar, his fiery gaze fixed on Emily. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You cannot escape what you are." With a final surge of light, the portal collapsed in on itself, the vortex vanishing with a sound like shattering glass. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive air lifting as the runes on the platform dimmed and faded. Aftermath. The group stood in stunned silence, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The crypt was still, its darkness no longer alive with malice. Emily slumped to the ground, clutching the journal to her chest as tears streamed down her face. "It's done," Maggie said quietly. "For now." Alice helped Emily to her feet, her expression softening. "You did it," she said. "We all did." But Emily couldn't shake Michael's final words from her mind. She knew the curse wasn't fully broken, that there was more to uncover, more to confront. The portal was sealed, but its echoes lingered, a haunting reminder of the darkness that still lay beneath Ballygally Castle. Isabella's fury. The silence that followed the portal's collapse was short-lived. The oppressive air in the crypt began to stir once more, but this time, it carried an unmistakable chill. The faint scent of lavender filled the chamber, a fragrance out of place amidst the damp stone and decay. Emily froze, her flashlight trembling in her hand. She glanced toward the group, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you smell that?" Alice sniffed the air and frowned. "Yeah, it's floral. What's it doing down here?" "It's not just the smell," Maggie said, her voice taut with tension. The temperature dropped. "She's coming." "Who's coming?" Liam asked, his flashlight darting nervously across the walls. Before Maggie could respond, a low, keening wail echoed through the crypt. It was a sound of raw, unbridled grief, a scream that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. The light from their flashlights flickered, and the shadows on the walls began to shift. The wail grew louder, and from the far corner of the room, a faint, shimmering figure emerged. It was Lady Isabella, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. Her long, dark hair flowed around her, and her eyes burned with a cold, spectral light. The lavender scent intensified, almost choking in its sweetness. The accusation, "You dare defile my resting place?" Isabella's voice echoed, her tone a mix of sorrow and fury. "You disturb the sanctity of the dead. And for what? To meddle in what you cannot understand." Emily stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Lady Isabella," she said, her voice trembling, "we're not here to harm you. We're trying to end the curse, Michael's curse." Isabella's gaze snapped to Emily, her eyes narrowing. "Michael is my tormentor, but you," she pointed a ghostly finger at Emily, her form growing more solid with each word. "You desecrated this place. You unleashed forces you cannot control." "That's not true," Maggie interjected. "We're trying to stop Michael, to free the souls he trapped." "Lies!" Isabella shrieked. The walls of the crypt trembled, dust falling from the ceiling as her fury filled the space. "I see your hand stained with the sins of the living. You will not leave this place unpunished." The first strike, the lavender scent turned acrid, and Isabella raised her hands. The shadows in the chamber surged toward the group, coalescing into sharp, jagged forms. Emily dove out of the way as a spear-like shadow shot toward her, embedding itself in the wall with a deafening crack. Alice screamed as another shadow lunged at her, narrowly missing her shoulder. "She's trying to kill us," she shouted, scrambling for cover behind a crumbling pillar. Maggie knelt on the ground, her fingers tracing a protective circle around herself with a piece of chalk. "We have to calm her down," she shouted. "She's consumed by anger, but she's not beyond reason." "Not beyond reason?" Liam yelled, dodging another shadowy strike. "She's trying to impale us." Emily's mind raced as she ducked behind the platform. Isabella's rage was palpable, but there was something else beneath it, grief, raw and unrelenting. She remembered the vision she'd seen in the turret, the desperate fight between Isabella and Michael. He had imprisoned her, taken her child, and cursed her to a tormented eternity. "Isabella, please," Emily shouted. "We're not your enemies. We're here to help Evelyn." A moment of clarity. At the mention of her daughter's name, Isabella hesitated. The shadows froze mid-strike, writhing uncertainly as though awaiting their mistress's command. Her spectral form flickered, the fury in her eyes softening for a brief moment. "Evelyn," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My child." Emily stepped forward cautiously, keeping her hands raised. "We know what Michael did to you," she said gently. "We know how he betrayed you and took Evelyn from you. That's why we're here, to end his curse and set you both free." Isabella's form shimmered, and for a moment, her face was etched with sorrow. But the anger returned just as quickly, her figure solidifying as her eyes blazed with renewed fury. "You speak her name," she said, her voice rising. "But you cannot understand her pain, or mine. You trespass in the place of our suffering, and for that, you must atone." The onslaught. The shadows surged again, faster and more relentless. One of them struck the platform, shattering a portion of its edge, and sending shards of stone flying. Maggie's protective circle glowed faintly, repelling a shadow that tried to pierce its barrier. But it was clear the chalk line wouldn't hold for long. "We can't keep this up," Alice shouted, ducking as another shadow swept over her head. Emily's gaze darted to the journal, still lying on the platform. Flipping through its pages earlier, she'd seen a passage about calming restless spirits, a ritual that required both words and an offering. But there was no time to perform it fully. She would have to improvise. "Maggie, the salt!" Emily called out. Maggie tossed her the bag, and Emily caught it clumsily. She poured a circle of salt around herself, then held her flashlight high, letting its beam illuminate Isabella's flickering form. "Lady Isabella," she called, her voice firm but compassionate, "we offer you peace. We offer you the chance to reunite with Evelyn." Isabella hesitated again, the shadows retreating slightly. "Peace," she echoed, her voice tinged with both hope and disbelief. "After all this time?" A desperate plea. "Yes," Emily said, stepping out of the salt circle and meeting Isabella's gaze. "But you have to trust us. Let us finish what we started. Let us end Michael's curse." The specter's form wavered, her anger ebbing as the lavender scent returned, soft and bittersweet. Her hands lowered, and the shadows began to dissolve into the walls. For a moment, Emily thought they had succeeded, but Isabella's eyes hardened once more. "How can I trust you?" she demanded. "How can I know you won't fail, as so many have before?" Emily swallowed hard. "Because I'm one of you. I carry his blood too, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." The final test. Isabella stared at her, the silence stretching painfully. Then slowly she nodded. "I will grant you one chance," she said. "But know this. If you falter, if you fail, my wrath will be the least of your concerns." The lavender scent faded, and Isabella's form dissolved into the air, leaving only a faint shimmer in the space where she had stood. The group collapsed onto the ground, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The shadows were gone, and the crypt was silent once more. Aftermath. Alice looked at Emily, her face pale. "What just happened? Did she let us go?" "For now," Maggie said, her voice weary. "But if we don't succeed?" Emily nodded, clutching the journal tightly. "We will. We have to." As they prepared to leave the crypt, Emily glanced back at the shattered platform and the faint traces of lavender still lingering in the air. Lady Isabella's fury had been a warning, a reminder of the cost of failure. But it had also been a promise. The key to breaking the curse lay ahead, and the stakes had never been higher.
We're driving me.